Before I start, I wanted to say that I already miss my partner who helps me make this show each week. She will be back after her recovery, and I will do everything I can to make her proud of her and of this show while she is gone. Heal up, and God bless you, September. War. Woe, Lord, what is it good for? Absolutely nothing. War by Edwin Starr. Now, I've been crying lately, thinking about the world as it is. Why must we go on hating? Why can't we live in bliss? Peace Train, Cat Stevens. Do your little bit of good where you are. It's those little bits of good put together that overwhelms the world. Arch Desmond Tutu. I am tired and sick of war. Its glory is all moonshine. It is only those who have never fired a shot nor heard the shrieks and groans of the wounded who cry out for blood and for vengeance and for desolation. War is hell. William Turson Sherman. Let's talk about war and peace. Welcome to Heresy and Hearsay, a podcast reclaiming faith in the political context. I'm Reverend Barney, and you can follow me on Twitter at SethRothII. You can also follow the show on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and any podcast catcher. Just look for Heresy and Hearsay. Please like, share, follow, subscribe to us. Also give us a review to help others find us. And I will be doing this today solo, but you can always find my partner and the better half of the podcast, September, on Twitch and Twitter at 9of12. That's NINEOF 12. And you can hear her on the Geek Grills and Trust Your Cake podcasts. Heresy and Hearsay has a Patreon site where you can find us at patreon.com/Heresy and Hearsay, where you can visit and help support this show. Just $2 a month goes a long way to help us make this humble show. You can also contribute with bits in Twitch or subscribe for free if you have Amazon Prime. So, I wanted to talk about this particularly, and especially I'm going to avoid a lot of political discussion. I want to go more historical, and I also want to go more biblical. So, this all started, a big culmination of why I got really super into politics was twofold. One was there was a senator here in the state of North Carolina by the name of Jesse Helms, who was a racist, segregationist, homophobic. And I worked for a political action committee for a summer, going door to door, trying to get money for a political action committee to run campaigns against Senator Helms for environmental reasons, because I was also at that time a big member of Greenpeace as well. The second kind of culmination, is me and my dear friend Mary Shannon went up to D.C. Well, she came down. She was living in Boston at the time. But we met up in D.C. In 2010 when Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert had their rally to restore sanity and/or fear. There was 215,000 people there to see a comedy guy talk about politics and to put his heart on his sleeve. And if you've seen Jon Stewart, especially when he talks about the 9/11 first responders, he believes in a lot of this stuff. He's also very centrist. He believes that that there should be discourse on both sides. But I think that's changed quite a bit over the last 10 years or so, or 9 or 10 years or so. So we were there listening to them talk, listening to great music. That quote that I did from Cat Stevens, he was there. Yusef is now what he calls himself. He back in 1977 became Muslim and devoted his life to Muslim causes. He was there as well as Ozzy Osbourne, and they were battling back and forth with Peace Train and Crazy Train. It was great. And then the Ohio Players came up, and we all sung about love, and it was amazing, that feeling. And I wanted to share that because there's peace when you have other people around you that believe in what you believe in. So personally, that story, the reason I told that story is because I believe that anybody can rally together and do good. There's been multiple peace marches back after 9/11 when we were going to war in Iraq. There were peace marches that were never covered by the mainstream media. I hate using that term now. Back then it was okay. Now with Trump it's just anyways. The mainstream media. Back in 1991 when I was in high school, I supported the troops that went over the first time to Iraq and I supported the troops that went to Afghanistan and Iraq then too. I support those troops because they're doing their job. They're ordered to go and do this job. And as long as they do it with dignity and respect of human life, which is hard to do in a war zone, but as best as you can, then it's not their fault. You can't not join the military without the chance of being in an armed conflict. It's just the way it is. But there does come a time and a place where you have to say, no, this is wrong. That was one of the, in the Nuremberg trials, that was one of the big things about the Nuremberg trials, was the fact that I'm just following orders isn't good enough as a defense. And it's not. It's not good enough as a defense. If you're committing war crimes, it's not good enough. You can't just say that. So we've been slowly disengaging ourselves from the political apparatus when it comes to war. There's a great book written by someone I admire because she was one of the people that I enjoyed listening to back on Air America days. And she has her own television show now, and that's Dr. Rachel Maddow. And she is a doctor. She has a PhD. It's not a PhD, but it's something similar. But she got it. She's a Rhodes Scholar. Super intelligent woman. And she wrote a book called Drift, which is basically Drift, the unmooring of the military complex. The American military complex is what it's called. And when I send these to September said she would still be doing some of the technical stuff and putting the show notes up and stuff like that. So, that being said, that link will be there for the book. But she wrote this book, and basically, after Vietnam, it was basically written up that to start another war, you had to go through Congress. Because that was part of the problem with both Korea somewhat, but Vietnam definitely, is that they were able to circumvent the Congress in some respect by declaring that it was a police action or we were just sending advisors. And yet, hundreds of thousands of men and women died in the armed forces, especially in Vietnam. So that happened, and we were, stuck in this war, and it went on for years. I was born at the tail end of that war. My father was in the military and had joined the military in 1973, and if the war had drug on even one more year, he would have probably went, and I probably would not have been here. Because my mother said she would not have married him if he went, because she couldn't do that. It would be too much for her. I tend to think that's not the case. My mother loved my father dearly, but that's a whole other topic. Anywho, so I was born at the tail end, or after it just ended. I was born at the tail end of Watergate. So political things were always happening around me, even as a child. My father was. He joined the military. He enjoyed the military. He enjoyed that structure. They wouldn't keep him after 1979 because my father, much like myself and most of my family, are not small people. He did his best to keep his weight off when he was in the military, but he was never going to be skinny. He was a farm boy by nature, and he was big structured by nature. So he left the military, but he cherished his military background. And it taught me a great deal too, because I was raised as a military brat. So I learned a lot. I grew up in so many different parts of the world and this country that I'm much more rounded than the individuals in the state who has never left the state, never left their hometown. And that's not always a bad thing to do that, but there's something to be said to seeing other cultures. But getting back to the book. So when the book was done, and I've read it a couple of times, basically the situation is that over this course of several decades, we got away from having to have Congress start wars for us. There's token response. The Iraq and Afghanistan is one of those. We went into the Balkans. And a lot of that comes to the military-industrial complex, something that Eisenhower warned us against. Eisenhower, who was a general in World War II, and basically set up D-Day. He warned that there were always going to be people that wanted to profit from war, and that we have to be careful of that. And this country was based on that. We've mentioned this a couple of times, but the book called The People's History of the United States talks about that quite a bit as well. That there's always people pushing for war because war makes money. It does. Now, there are people, like, for example, when we went to war in World War II, which a lot of people feel is probably the most justified war, especially of the 20th century, which is true in a lot of respects. There was a great atrocities going on. But when we went to war, we were already starting to recover from the Depression. And some people say if it wasn't for the war, we wouldn't have recovered. Other economic advisors or economists have looked at that and said, no, it actually stunted it some. We would have actually grown much better without it. But after World War II, we had this great peace. There was Korea, which was stupid. And because of it, we now have Kim Jong-un as, a threat to, not a threat to the United States, but a threat to Japan and a threat to South Korea. It was that war that did not help. Vietnam, you had the Falklands, you had a lot of little hotspot wars too, or battles at least. And for whatever reason, we're trying to define ourselves by the nation by war when we don't have to. And that's the other thing. Isaiah talks about that. Isaiah says in Isaiah 9:5, For every battle of the warrior is confused with noise, the garments rolled in blood, and this shall be with burning and with fuels of fire. War is hell. Sherman, who burnt Atlanta, who was probably one of the reasons why the North was able to break the back of the South in the Civil War, hated war. Hated seeing his men die. hated seeing the pain that his troops went through. Because and at the time they were still using muskets. There are stories of cannons being filled with chains, metal chains, that when fired out would spin and would cut people in half, would cut their limbs off. And the doctors and everything. If you've seen any type of documentary or historical reenactment television program about the Civil War, and especially about battlefield surgery, it is brutal. It is vicious. It is nearly as bad as being shot in it. Because you're getting shot in the arm. They didn't do a lot of cleaning, or if at all. Not like, you see surgeons today, even in television shows, how they wash up before they didn't do any of that. They were covered in muck and mire just like everything else. And they're trying to dig through skin to get this musket ball out. And if you've seen the movie The Patriot, musket balls could be made out of tin or made out of tin soldiers melted down. And that's got to melt, that's got to bend, and that's got to be impossible to get out. And, a lot of men died from infection more than they died from their wounds. And those that survived, their lives were shortened. One of my favorite songs. I am a fan, not a fan. I am interested in the First World War. Because it was a horrible war that didn't need to happen. It produced some of my favorite authors, or it had some of my favorite authors in it that I think produced them. J.R.R. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, others like that. And there's a song, and the Progs do an amazing cover of it. It's called Waltzing Matilda. And it's 8 minutes long, and it is sad, and it talks about how this young man goes to war, ends up with no legs, and how painful that is. The song by Metallica, One, talks about the horrors of war, or at least the video does, and how horrible war is. So we've got war, and we've got the glories of war. You hear about the Congressional Medal of Honor quite often. And these men and women sacrifice themselves and nearly die for others. We have a senator who lost both her legs. Duckworth, Senator Duckworth. Tammy Duckworth. I knew the name would come to me eventually. And she spent so much time, she was in so much pain, and I'm sure she's still in pain. I'm telling you these stories, and I'm telling you some of the horror stuff, especially right now, because our armed forces aren't that large of a number. Several 100,000. So a lot of us Americans are not touched by war. And we're not touched by people who have faced war. There was another person on the Air America who his name was John Elliott, and he would do every month he would read the names of all the individuals who had died in Afghanistan and Iraq, because at the time President George W. Bush basically made it to where we couldn't see the coffins, we couldn't see all the flag draped coffins coming off. because he didn't want us to be reminded that war has a cost. And it's not just money. Money is part of it. 7,000 plus men and women have died in Afghanistan and Iraq since 9/11. And that may not seem like a lot, but that's 7,000 people, 7,000 brothers and sisters, husbands and wives, children who didn't come home, that didn't add to this fabric of America other than for their death in a foreign country. And one of the wars, a foreign country that had done us no wrong. Iraq had not harmed us at all. And we went to war with them. So that's some of the political and some of the historical stuff. I want people to understand that war is not an option if it can be helped. That we should really try hard not to go to war. I am not against protecting ourselves. I am not against protecting yourself. I was raised in a family that believed in guns. My father used to be a member of the NRA and he left them because of what they become. If he saw what they were now, he would be truly disgusted. But I was raised, I understood what guns were and everything else, and I was raised that it's okay to protect yourself, and it is. It's okay for a country to protect itself. It's okay for a country to help out smaller countries. We talk about superheroes in our movies and stuff like that. Superheroes are there to protect the weak. It's why the nickname superpowers came to be. U.S. was a superpower. And if we're legitimately doing good things, we should. We should help out those countries that are in trouble. I talked about the Balkans for a second, and it was badly managed, but there was genocide going on there. And also, Clinton went to that war. There was other reasons, and none of them good. But the good reasons were there was genocide going on in that war there. And Clinton also wanted to make a difference after what happened to Rwanda and the genocide that happened there. But there are so many genocides that are around and we should try to do something about them. Omitting. But it shouldn't be a unilateral thing, and this is political. It shouldn't be unilateral and shouldn't be just us. And the thing is, when we went to Iraq the first time, it wasn't just us. Iraq started a battle with another smaller country. And we had a coalition of 100 different countries helping out one way or the other. Some with troops on the ground, some with support, some with supplies, some with just money. When we went back, not even a third of that. And most of them were small countries that may have sent token support at best. We're not, we have to build that coalition if there is a true evil out there in the world. But we could also do what Romans says. Romans 12:18. If it be possible, as much as it in you, live peaceably with all men. Romans also says in Romans 14, let us therefore follow after the things that make for peace, and things wherein one day may edify each other. War isn't glorious. War isn't great. As Yoda once says, why does war make one great? It doesn't. There's a great poem by Mark Twain. And I like Mark Twain. And Mark Twain was a humanist. He didn't believe in a divine creation or a divine creator. And there's a great poem. And he finished writing the poem. And if I know my timeline correctly, it was during the Spanish-American War, where we were fighting in Cuba with the Rough Riders. As a child, the Rough Riders were a great thing, and I loved Theodore Roosevelt. He's still one of my favorite presidents for so much he has done. He was a big breaker of monopolies and everything else. He's still very problematic, as every human being is. But when I was a kid and I read about the Rough Riders and their charges and how up San Juan Hill and all that and how amazing that was, I didn't think about the poem because I didn't know about it at the time. But Mark Twain wrote this poem, and he went to his family and is like, this cannot be published until I am dead. And it wasn't. The poem is very pointed. The gist of the poem is this. There's a church, as churches are, that is gathered together to pray for the men and women that are the men and women that are about to go to war. And that their side would have victory. And that their side would win. And the doors of the church open up, and an old man comes in. And he walks up the aisle and walks to the altar. And he gets behind the pulpit. And he says, your prayers will be answered. But let me tell you what it means. Let me tell you the suffering that the men that your boys kill, and of the heartache of mothers who will never see their children again, and of the pain of the land that they'll be in, and what it feels like to lose a battle and lose a war and lose so much of yourself. And he walked back out, and the door closed behind him. And they really didn't think much of what the man had to say. It was a very powerful poem because we never see the other side. We never see what happens. We never think about it. When we would go to war and we hope that our boys come home safe and sound, that means if there's a true war, if it's a true conflict, that means someone else's child isn't coming home. Someone else's brother or sister isn't coming home. Those are things you have to think about. Tolkien was not a fan of war, but he also didn't believe that you should be subjugated. And I'm not saying war should be completely abolished. I would love to see us to be totally at peace. But we're not going to be. There's always going to be evil in the world. And with evil in the world, there will be people that need to stand up against it. But there's a difference between war against evil, such as with the Nazis, and war for gain. Hebrews 12:14 says, "Follow peace with all men and holiness, without which no man shall see the Lord." And James 3:17 says, "But the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, and easy to be entreated, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy." Jesus said in Matthew 5:38 through 40, "You have heard it said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps your right cheek, turn them the other cheek also. And if anyone sues you and takes your shirt, hand them your coat as well." What does that mean exactly? don't be easy to anger. Don't get upset. I know, I have to work on that myself. Another one else said, someone else, and I forget who it was that said it, but it's like an eye for an eye. Yeah, that keeps going on. We're all going to be blind and toothless. We are quick to anger as a nation. And this is before Trump. This is before Obama. This is before Clinton. This nation has always been quick to anger. It's just that we've had certain things in place to keep us from going full on war. And it's a lot harder that way when they have to deliberate. That's why the war powers were given to Congress, not to the president. The president can request it, and most times he gets it. I don't think there's been a time he hasn't. But we are quick to anger. And this nation was built on blood. You know, the blood of Native Americans. So, what do you do? It starts, as Desmond Tutu said, it starts with small things. Don't let yourself get angry. Don't let yourself, as far as in a warlike way. You're allowed to get angry. Jesus got angry. But get angry for a righteous reason. And I'm not saying a holy righteous reason. I'm not saying a religion righteous reason. I'm saying for a righteous reason. Because there's righteous anger. And it's okay to be angry. It's just how you use that anger. And someone keeps saying to me, you can't help how you feel. You can only help how you react to it. So don't strike out in anger. There is so much of that going on right now. It's like there's a video going around on Twitter right now of this guy who was so angry towards women and lashed out and just went off on everybody and started throwing punches. He was so angry and so bitter at the world that violence was his only answer. And violence has become an answer of the United States. A lot of the mass shootings is because of this. Because we have glorified violence. Not in our video games or in our television, but in our history. That it's okay to go after those who have wronged you in a violent manner. Or to take back what's yours. Or to take. As I said, this nation was built on blood. On the blood of Native Americans. On the blood of slaves. On the blood of immigrants. And we're still doing it now. ICE is going around town to town rounding up people that were good citizens. They didn't have citizenship. But citizenship is not citizens. We have war to deal with. A lot of it. Don't add to it. I'm going to read this. I'll do my best. It's a bit long. This comes from the first time I heard it. It was from a television show in the late 70s, early 80s called Cosmos. And it talks about this planet. And it talks about this world. I am a Christian and I am a person of faith. But that doesn't mean that I can't find wisdom from people who don't believe or people of different faiths. Carl Sagan was a non-believer. Carl Sagan also, if evidence was shown to him the otherwise, he would have believed. I think. if scientific evidence was shown. Unfortunately, that's not always the case when it comes to faith. But he was more than just a scientist. He was a philosopher and an amazing man to listen to. And this is one of my favorite things he ever put down on paper and ever spoke. It's called Little Blue Dot, and I'm going to read this. Look again at that dot. Now this dot, I should back up a little bit. I apologize before I read. So the pale blue dot was a picture that was done on Voyager. I'm sorry. Cosmos was done in the early 90s. I apologize. Late 80s, early 90s. But this is this is Voyager 1 on February 14th, 1990. As it was leaving our planetary neighborhood and the fringes of our solar system, by the request of Carl Sagan, the engineers turned it around for one last look from its home planet. It was 6.4 billion kilometers or 4 billion miles away. And it took a picture of our solar system. And there is a little blue dot. And you can see this picture. And it's very tiny. So look at this dot again. Look again at that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it is everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you've ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives, the aggregate of our joys and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hunter and voyager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilizations, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and every sinner in history of our species lived there, on that mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. The Earth is a very small stage on the vast cosmic arena. Think that the rivers of blood spilt by all those generals and emperors so that in glory and triumph they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of that dot. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on a scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. Our posturings, our imaginings of self-importance, the delusions that we may have some privileged position in the universe, are challenged by this point of blue light. Our planet is a lonely speck in a great enveloping cosmic dark. Is our obscurity and all this vastness. There is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. Earth is the only world known so far to harbor life. There are nowhere else, at least in the near future, to where our species can migrate. Visit, yes. Settle, not yet. Like it or not, the moment the Earth is where we make our stand. It has been said in astronomy, it is said that astronomy is a humbling and character-building experience. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny planet. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another, and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known. Carl Sagan, Pale Blue Dot, 1994. I want to thank you for listening today. So let me do a couple other things. Before I end tonight, first off, our carrot goes to the women's soccer team for A, winning their 4th cup and their 2nd in a row, and B, for Megan Rapose. I apologize for mispronouncing her name. But for the co-captain of that team, Megan Rapose, for being such a badass. And I hope every woman in the world, when they take down a man for being a douche nozzle, does her pose. Because she is an amazing woman. My stick for this month, or for this week, is Tucker Carlson, showing his true racial side by calling one of our representatives, whose name I'm not going to attempt to pronounce because I'm horrible at pronunciations, but asking if we have failed as a nation because she dares to speak out. A Somali immigrant who rose to the rank of representative of her district, who is willing to speak out against our president and against the mistakes that we make both here in the U.S. as well as foreign, as far as our foreign policy. How we handle the Middle East and how we handle Muslims like herself. And how he feels that we have failed as a nation because we didn't make her a good Christian American woman who sat down, got pregnant, and stayed barefoot. Not exactly what he said, but that was the gist. That we don't indoctrinate our immigrants enough. Or maybe our immigrants are from bad places. As Trump once said, these are trash places. Shitholes is what he called them, I do believe. And Tucker Carlson feeding into that trope and feeding into that hate. For you, sir, you get the stick. Thank you again for joining us here at Heresy and Hearsay. I'm Reverend Barney, and you can follow me on Twitter at SethRothII. You can follow the show on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and podcast, as well as our website. Just Google us. Don't forget our Patreon page, where $2 a month can help us keep going. And you can always find my partner on Twitch and Twitter at 9 of 12. That's at NINEOE. Try that again, Daniel. At NINEOF12. And you can also hear her on the Geek Grills and Trust Your Podcast. Thank you for listening today, and bless your hearts.